the Russian ships passed the Florida coast. Now, the visit of these Russian warships comes at a time of heightened tension between the West and Russia over the ongoing war in Ukraine. Let's bring in global affairs correspondent Maya Rodriguez now live from our D.C. newsroom with the details on this. Maya, what are the Cubans and the Russians saying about why those warships are there?
Well, Chris, the Cuban government says this is all part of a military exercise between the two nations, a mark of what they call historically friendly relations between Cuba and Russia. And while there is precedent for this kind of Russian military exercise in Cuba, experts say this one comes at a delicate time.
Russian warships arriving in Havana's harbor, part of Vladimir Putin's efforts to project power amidst the Russian war on Ukraine and the U.S. decision to allow Ukraine to use American weapons to attack inside parts of Russia.
The Kremlin continues to be upset about the West and the United States providing support for the Ukrainians.
Russia's Ministry of Defense releasing video this week of the Russian military vessels practicing naval maneuvers somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, while at the same time, the U.S. Navy taking to social media with photos showing their own joint operation with the Canadian Navy, also in the Atlantic. All of it happening around this week's visit to Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida, by 3 Russian warships carrying hypersonic missiles, along with a nuclear-powered submarine.
This is something that we've seen in the past. I think what's unusual about it is the context in which it currently takes place now.
Ryan Berg is director of the Americas program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He says the war in Ukraine adds a new dimension to Russian military exercises in the Caribbean.
Certainly the presence of the Russians allows them to say that they are able to project power, military power, into the Western Hemisphere, just as the United States is able to do so in the European theater.
Ukraine has hit the Russian Navy hard in the Black Sea.
Something around 1/3 of their Black Sea fleet has been sunk by the Ukrainians through innovative methods, through the use of drones and missiles. Russia can ill afford to have too many of its ships in the Western Hemisphere while it's actively prosecuting a war in the European theater.
Which means any comparison to the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the then Soviet Union deployed nuclear missiles to Cuba in the 1960s, may be overstating the current reality, according to the Atlantic Council's Andrew Danieri.
This is nowhere near the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're not anywhere close to nuclear war. There are American ships actually tracking the activities of these Russian ships as they make their way toward Cuba. So I think this is actually quite under control,
despite all the attention it's garnering.
Now, the Russian Defense Ministry said while it was in the Atlantic, it conducted computer-simulated attacks aiming at mock targets that were 370 miles away. All of this is of note because, of course, Cuba is only 90 miles from Florida. Chris.
All right, global affairs correspondent Maya Rodriguez for us live in Washington. Maya, thank you.